Don't you die on me. Amara's small hands shook as she pushed down on the millionaire's chest, counting every compression like her own life depended on it. The plane lurched so hard to the side that water bottles, bags, and an empty oxygen mask swung wildly above her. People were screaming, praying, calling out for loved ones, but Amara heard only the ragged breath of the man sprawled across the first-class seats. His name was Richard Harrington, a cold, distant millionaire who hadn't even looked at her properly when she boarded just a few hours earlier. Now his expensive shirt was wrinkled, his silver hair damp with sweat, his lips turning a frightening shade of gray. "Please," she whispered, tears blurring her eyes as she kept pressing on his chest like the flight attendant had shown her. "You can't die. Not before you tell me why. Why do you have that photo? Why were you watching me?" 30,000 feet above the ocean, as the plane fought through the worst turbulence the captain had seen in decades, a poor 12-year-old girl from one of the roughest neighborhoods in Baltimore was trying to save the life of a man who was worth more than everyone on her block combined. She had no idea that if he lived long enough to speak again, his next words would tear apart everything she thought she knew about herself. 3 hours earlier, Amara Williams had shuffled down the aisle of the Boeing 777, clutching her worn backpack like a shield. The soft blue lighting, the calm hum of people speaking in different accents, the flight attendants in flawless uniforms. None of it felt real. She was used to flickering streetlights, cracked sidewalks, and sirens at night, not this floating world of quiet wealth. "Excuse me, sweetheart." A flight attendant with a name tag that read Patricia touched her shoulder gently. "Are you traveling alone?" Amara nodded. Her throat was too tight to speak. Patricia's expression softened. "Let me see your boarding pass, okay?" Her red nails glinted under the lights as she checked the ticket. "Seat 14A, right this way." They passed through the curtain into first class, and Amara felt like she had stepped into a movie. Huge reclining seats, glowing screens, people drinking orange juice from real glasses. Most passengers were buried in laptops or already half asleep. But one man caught her attention. He sat perfectly still, staring out the window as if the clouds were telling him secrets. He was older, in his early 60s maybe, with silver hair and a sharp black suit that probably cost more than everything Amara's grandmother owned. A heavy gold watch peeked from under his cuff, and a leather briefcase rested between his polished shoes. Money practically clung to him, but his eyes looked hollow, like someone who had lost something he'd never get back. Then he turned and saw her. For one brief pulse of a moment, their eyes locked, and his expression changed. Surprise, confusion, and then something deeper, something almost like pain. Then his face snapped shut, cold and distant again. "Sir, can I get you anything before takeoff?" Another flight attendant asked him. "Just privacy," he said flatly. Patricia guided Amara on. Still, a strange unease settled in her stomach. Why had he looked at her like that? Like he'd seen a ghost. "Here we are, 14A, Patricia said. "It's not a full flight, so you've got your row to yourself." "Lucky girl." "Lucky." Amara almost laughed. Nothing in her life had ever felt lucky. She slid into her seat. This trip, her first flight ever, hadn't come from savings or careful planning. It had come in the form of a letter with a seal that looked too official to be fake. "Your presence is requested in London regarding an inheritance matter. All expenses paid. Discretion advised." Her grandmother had called it a scam, until the law firm in London answered their calls, until a notary came to their tiny apartment and confirmed the documents were real. Someone connected to her father, James Williams, who had died when she was 4, had left something for her. As the plane took off, leaving Baltimore behind, Amara hugged her father's old, dog-eared copy of The Secret Garden to her chest. It was one of the only things of his she still had. Inside it, his handwritten notes were scribbled in the margins, like small echoes of his voice. She had just opened the book when a commotion in first class drew her attention. The silver-haired man, the one who'd stared at her, was arguing with a flight attendant. "This is unacceptable," he said, voice tight with irritation. "I requested the seat beside me remain empty. I am not accustomed to strangers in my space." The attendant maintained her calm smile. "I'm sorry, Mr. Harrington, but we're fully booked in first today." Mr. Harrington. So that was his name. Another man, Mr. Chun, offered to switch seats. Harrington refused at first, more out of pride than reason, then finally let him move. When Harrington sat back down, His gaze swept the cabin and landed on Amara again. This time she didn't look away. He did. Later, as he walked past the curtain toward the first-class restroom, something slipped from his jacket pocket and fluttered to the floor, landing just beyond the curtain on the economy side. Nobody seemed to notice. Amara stared at the folded piece of paper. Her heart thudded. She unbuckled her seat belt, grabbed it, and straightened. She meant to give it back right away. She really did. But her fingers unfolded the paper before she could stop herself. It wasn't a ticket stub or a note. It was a photograph, worn on the creases like it had been opened 1,000 times. A young black couple smiled at the camera in front of a small house. The man was tall and lean in faded jeans and a Howard University t-shirt. The woman had close-cropped hair and a dimple on her right cheek. Amara knew that dimple. She saw it in the mirror every single day. Her stomach dropped. Her knees almost buckled. The man in the photo was her father. Why on earth would a rich, white businessman like Richard Harrington have an old picture of her parents? The bathroom door opened. Panicking, Amara refolded the photo and slid it into her book just as Harrington came back, patting his pockets with growing alarm. Flight attendants began searching the floor around his seat. They didn't find it. Amara buckled herself in, the weight of the stolen knowledge burning against her chest. That was when the turbulence started. The seat belt sign dinged. The plane shuddered like it had hit something invisible. Drinks spilled. People gasped. And somewhere in first class, a millionaire's life and a poor girl's entire identity were about to collide. The turbulence grew worse, slamming the plane up and down like a toy in rough water. The captain's voice crackled over the speakers, calm but firm, telling everyone to sit down and buckle up. Amara gripped the armrests, trying to steady her breathing. "It's all right, dear," came a warm voice from the aisle. An elderly woman with soft gray hair and a lavender cardigan eased herself into the seat beside her. "I've been flying since before you were born. Planes can handle more than this." She offered Amara a peppermint from a little tin. "I'm Dorothy Jackson. You look like you could use a bit of sugar." "I'm Amara," she replied, taking the candy. They talked quietly, about first flights, about family, about how Dorothy was headed to London to visit her son. For a moment, the old woman's calm voice made Amara forget about the photo hidden inside the secret garden, until a panicked voice rose from first class. "Is there a doctor on board?" The energy in the cabin shifted in an instant. Flight attendants hurried forward, grabbing a medical kit. People craned their necks. Hearts began to race. Dorothy frowned. "I was a nurse for 47 years, she muttered as she unbuckled her belt. "Critical care. Let me see if they need help." "Ma'am, please sit down," a flight attendant started, but Dorothy's stare cut through him. "Do you want experience or not?" Amara didn't even remember deciding to follow. Her feet just moved. At the curtain between economy and first, she saw him. Richard Harrington was slumped in his seat, skin ashen, eyes half rolled back. An oxygen mask hovered near his face. His chest rose and fell in shallow, desperate breaths. "Possible heart attack," someone said. Dorothy slid into the chaos like she had been born in it, checking his pulse, barking crisp instructions. And then his eyes opened. They flicked wildly around the cabin, past the flight attendants, past Dorothy, until they landed on Amara. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to just the two of them. He ripped the oxygen mask aside. "The photo," he rasped, his voice barely more than air. "Please." Dorothy pushed the mask back on. "Sir, you need to stay calm." A middle-aged man in a plain gray suit, Mr. Chun, looked straight at Amara. "Do you know what he's talking about, young lady?" Dozens of eyes turned toward her. Amara froze. If she admitted she had the photo, she'd have to explain how she'd taken it. But if she lied, before she could speak, the plane dropped. It felt like the floor had vanished. People screamed as the cabin plunged and then bounced. Overhead bins rattling, oxygen masks dropping down with a terrifying hiss. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain said, voice tight, "we've hit severe turbulence. Everyone must sit down and fasten seat belts immediately. Crew, secure the cabin." Dorothy grabbed Amara by the arm. "Back to your seat now." They stumbled toward economy, nearly thrown off their feet. Just as they reached their row, Harrington's hand shot out and clamped around Amara's wrist with surprising strength. "Wait," he wheezed, yanking the mask down just enough to speak. "James and Eliza." Amara froze. Those were her parents' names. You're Their daughter, he gasped, his eyes desperate and glassy. I need to. The plane bucked again hard. Flight attendants wrestled him back, strapping him in tight and securing his mask as Dorothy almost dragged Amara into her seat. They held on as the aircraft shook and groaned, lights flickering, emergency glow bathing the cabin in eerie blue. This isn't normal, is it? Amara whispered. No, Dorothy said quietly, squeezing her hand. But we're going to be okay. The pilots know what they're doing. After a long, terrifying stretch of time, the turbulence slowly eased. The captain announced they were diverting to Gander International Airport in Newfoundland due to weather and a medical emergency on board. A medical emergency named Richard Harrington. When they finally landed, roughly, tires screeching, emergency vehicles chasing them down the runway, everyone was told to stay seated as paramedics boarded. Amara couldn't see much from economy, only flashes of uniforms and movement in first class. They're taking him out, someone said. He doesn't look good. Something inside Amara snapped. If he left now, she might never get answers. She unbuckled her belt and shot to her feet. Amara. Dorothy tried to stop her, but she slipped into the aisle, heart pounding. A flight attendant blocked her path. Miss, you have to sit down. I need to talk to him, Amara pleaded, her voice shaking. It's about my parents. Please. Before the attendant could respond, a voice cut through the noise from up front. The girl, Harrington croaked. I need to speak to the girl. A paramedic appeared at the curtain, scanning the cabin. We need a young girl. A passenger he's asking for. That's me, Amara blurted. Her hands fumbled for her backpack. She pulled out the secret garden, opened it with trembling fingers, and showed them the photo. He dropped this. These are my parents. The paramedic stared at the picture, then at her. Whatever he saw in her face convinced him. Come quickly, he said. They led her into first class. Harrington lay strapped to a stretcher now, wires and tubes everywhere, oxygen mask fogging with each shallow breath. His skin looked even grayer under the harsh cabin lights. Sir, we really need to move you, one paramedic said. 1 minute, Harrington whispered, clawing the mask aside again. Private. They hesitated, then stepped back just enough to give them a tiny circle of privacy. Amara moved closer, clutching the photo so tightly it crumpled. I found this, she said, her voice barely audible. Why do you have a picture of my parents? His eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, the powerful businessman vanished. All she saw was a broken man who had been carrying a secret for far too long. Not much time, he rasped. Listen very carefully. He beckoned her closer. She leaned down until his lips were almost at her ear. What he whispered was so soft, she almost missed it, but once she heard it, the words crashed through her like lightning. I'm your father, Amara. James raised you, but you're my daughter. Her world cracked. That's not true, she choked out, stumbling back. You're lying. He shook his head weakly. Ask your grandmother about. July 17th, 1992, she knows. His hand fumbled at his jacket and pressed something small and cold into her palm. A simple key on a plain metal ring. London, he breathed. Lawyers will explain. Everything is inside. Then his eyes rolled back, and the monitors shrieked. He's crashing, one paramedic shouted. In a blur, they shoved the mask back on, lifted the stretcher, and rushed him off the plane. Amara stood there, stunned, with a key in one hand, a photo in the other, and tears streaming down her face. Dorothy's hand settled gently on her shoulder. What did he say, child? Amara swallowed, the words scraping her throat like broken glass. He said, her voice cracked. He said he's my father. Part 3. Secrets, phone calls, and a hotel too grand. The hours after landing blurred into a fog of waiting rooms, announcements, and rearranged travel plans. Passengers were herded off the plane and into the small Newfoundland airport while the airline scrambled to arrange a new aircraft. Amara sat alone on a plastic chair, the photograph and key on her lap. Richard Harrington claimed to be her father. But her father was James Williams, a black mechanic with kind eyes and a warm laugh who used to smell like motor oil and peppermint. She had seen his death certificate. She had visited his grave every year. So how could this pale, silver-haired millionaire possibly be her father? Mind if I sit? Dorothy asked, holding 2 steaming cups. Amara nodded. The hot chocolate warmed her hands, but not the cold knot in her chest. So, Dorothy said gently after a while, Do you want to talk about it? Amara hesitated. Dorothy was technically a stranger, but right now, she was the only person in the world who had watched this nightmare unfold beside her. He said he's my biological father, Amara murmured. But I already have a father. Had. Her throat tightened. James Williams. Everyone says I look just like him. Family, Dorothy said quietly, is sometimes messier than we wish it were. Before Amara could answer, an airline employee approached Dorothy, then walked off again. Dorothy followed him, came back 15 minutes later with a look that was half relieved, half serious. Good news and bad news, sweetheart, she said, settling down. Good news, Mr. Harrington is stable. They took him to a hospital nearby, and he's conscious. The relief was sharp, unexpected. And the bad news? Amara asked. Hospital's too far. There's no time for you to visit before the replacement flight leaves. She paused. But I might have stretched the truth just a little and told the airline your family. They're trying to get you a phone call with him before boarding. Amara stared at her. You did that for me. Someone clearly wants you kept in the dark, Dorothy said. You deserve a flashlight at least. An hour later, an airline agent appeared with a cordless phone. Miss Williams, he said, we have Mr. Harrington on the line for you. It'll have to be brief. Amara took the phone with shaking hands and walked a few steps away. Hello, she whispered. Amara, Harrington's voice was weaker but steadier than she'd expected. Thank you for calling. Are you really my father? The question burst out on its own, raw and terrified. He was silent for a long moment. Yes, he said finally. Biologically, I am. Her stomach twisted. Hearing him confirm it made it feel too real. How? She demanded. My father was black. I look like him. Everyone says I have his face. James was a good man, Harrington said softly. A better man than I was then. He loved your mother. When she found out she was pregnant and everything around her fell apart, he stepped in. He offered to give you his name and his protection. Why didn't anyone tell me? Amara's voice cracked. Why am I just finding out now? On a plane, in the middle of a crisis. Because when you were born, he said, your mother wanted you to grow up without scandal, without questions, without being the secret child of a married, white CEO. James could give you a stable home. I couldn't. Not then. I chose my company, my reputation, my existing family. It was the worst decision of my life. His words hung heavy between them. And now, she asked, her voice stinging. Now you suddenly care? I have always cared, he replied quietly. From the moment I found out you existed. I respected the arrangement, but I watched from a distance. I made sure your neighborhood programs had funding. I helped your school stay open when budgets were cut. The trust in London, the one that brought you on that flight, that's from me. Pieces clicked in her mind. The community center that never closed. The special math program that shouldn't have existed with their budget. You were watching us, she whispered, sick with confusion. Watching me. Not personally. Through lawyers, donations. I tried not to cross the lines your mother and James drew. But when your grandmother got sick, I couldn't stay away anymore. If anything happens to her and nobody steps in legally, the system might pull you into foster care. I couldn't let that happen. He paused, breathing harder. The key I gave you, it opens a safe deposit box in London. Inside is a letter from your mother and other things I've kept for you. The lawyers will explain. They've been preparing for this for years. Do you know where my mother is? Amara blurted. Another long silence. That, he said slowly, is a story that deserves more time than we have over this phone. She was ill, Amara. Not in the way a person catches a cold. Her mind betrayed her. Your grandmother knows. My guess is the letter will tell you more than I can right now. Miss Williams. The airline agent motioned. We're starting boarding. You'll have to end the call soon. Amara swallowed. Everything inside her felt scrambled. I don't know how to feel about any of this. You don't have to decide today, Harrington said. Go to London. Meet with the lawyers. Read your mother's letter. After that, if you never want to speak to me again, I will accept it. But you deserve the truth and the choices we took from you. The announcement for boarding echoed through the terminal. People began lining up. They're calling me, Amara said. I have to go. Be safe, he whispered. Whatever you think of me, remember this. You were never unwanted. Just very badly protected. The line cut. Later that night, in a London hotel far too big and fancy for someone who shared a cramped two-room apartment with her grandmother, Amara lay on a huge bed staring at the ceiling. her suitcase sat untouched in the corner. A room service tray rested by the window. She dialed home. Amara, her grandmother's voice came through, thin with worry, but strong underneath. Thank God. They said something happened on the flight. Are you all right? I'm okay, Amara said. It was scary, but I'm fine. And the man? The one who got sick. Amara's hand tightened around the phone. Grandma, do you know someone named Richard Harrington? There was a silence, so deep Amara could almost hear her grandmother's heartbeat through the line. Where did you hear that name? Her grandmother whispered. He was on my flight. He's the man who got sick, Amara said. He said he's my real father. The sharp inhale on the other end of the line answered the question before her grandmother spoke. Oh Lord, Grandma breathed. So he finally told you. So it's true. Amara's voice broke. You lied to me? All this time? No, her grandmother said firmly. We never lied about James. James was your father in every way that matters. He loved you. He raised you. He held you when you were sick and read you stories when you were scared. His blood or no, that man was your father. But biologically, Amara said, the word bitter on her tongue. Biology isn't everything, her grandmother replied. Then she sighed, her voice softening. We made a choice, your mother, James, and I. We chose what we thought would give you the safest life. A world that already judges black girls for everything didn't need another reason to put weight on your shoulders. What happened between Mom and him? Amara whispered. Why didn't she tell me? Why did she leave? That's not all my story to tell, Grandma said quietly. Your mother was troubled. Her mind turned against her. After James died, it got worse. But she loved you. Don't you ever doubt that. Amara pressed the phone closer, tears stinging her eyes. Before he collapsed, she said, Mr. Harrington told me to ask you about July 17th, 1992. Another long silence. That was the day he walked away, her grandmother said at last. The day he chose his company and his image over your mother and you. It broke her. It broke everything. But, baby, there are some things even I can't explain as well as your mama could. Her letter, Amara whispered, thinking of the key. He said she wrote me a letter. Then you read that letter, Grandma said. And you remember this. You are the child of love and bad decisions, not of shame. What grown folks did or didn't do, those sins aren't yours to carry. When they finally hung up, Amara lay in the soft darkness of the hotel room, clutching her father's old book, the photo, and the key under her pillow. Tomorrow, she would meet the lawyers. Tomorrow, she might finally learn who she really was. The next morning, London smelled like rain and expensive coffee. Amara smoothed her navy dress with shaking hands as she waited in the hotel lobby, her backpack strapped to her shoulders. Inside it, her passport, her father's book, the photo, the key, and the letter that had brought her here in the first place. At exactly 9:30, a young woman in a gray suit approached her. Miss Williams, she asked with a polite smile. I'm Lydia Powell from Blackwell, Henderson and Associates. I'll be taking you to the office. They walked through narrow Mayfair streets lined with old stone buildings and polished brass plaques. Lydia kept her tone professional but kind, asking if Amara had slept well, if she needed breakfast, if she was feeling all right after the eventful journey. You know Mr. Harrington? Amara asked carefully as they waited at a crosswalk. He's one of our oldest clients, Lydia replied. Our firm handles many of his personal matters. Does that include me? Lydia's eyes softened. Today is about making sure you understand the full picture, she said. Mr. Henderson will explain. My job is to help you feel safe and supported. The law firm's building was exactly what Amara imagined rich people law looked like. Wood-paneled walls, thick carpets, old portraits. The conference room Lydia led her into had a long table, tall windows, and a view of a small garden below. Water? Tea, Lydia offered. Water, please, Amara said, her mouth suddenly dry. The door opened again. A tall man with neatly combed silver hair and a dark blue suit stepped in. His presence was calm, commanding, but not cold. Miss Williams, he said, extending his hand. I'm Edward Henderson. Thank you for coming, especially after everything you've just been through. She shook his hand, trying not to be intimidated. He sat across from her. Lydia took a seat off to the side, tablet in hand. Let's start with the most pressing question, Henderson said. You've been told that Richard Harrington is your biological father. You would like to know if that's true. Yes, Amara said, heart pounding. Is it? Henderson opened a leather folder and slid a document across the table. This is the result of a DNA test conducted shortly after your birth, with your mother's consent, he said. It confirms with 99.997% certainty that Richard Harrington is your biological father. The lines on the page meant little to her, but the conclusion was clear. So my mother knew, Amara murmured. She knew, and she still let James raise me as his. That was her decision, Henderson said gently. James Williams agreed, fully aware of the circumstances. Mr. Harrington objected initially, but in the end, he accepted the arrangement they all believed was best for you at that time. Amara stared at the polished wood table, feeling like she was floating above her own life. And now, she asked, what's changed? Several things, Henderson replied. Your grandmother's health, your mother's continued absence, Mr. Harrington's age, and shifting perspective. There was also a practical concern. Without a clear plan, if your grandmother's condition worsened, the state could intervene in your care. Mr. Harrington insisted that you should never end up in foster care when you have living, capable family. He slid another document toward her. This is a trust, he said. Mr. Harrington has placed a significant sum of money in your name. It covers your education, living expenses, healthcare, and provides additional funds when you reach adulthood. The important part is this. The trust is irrevocable. It does not depend on whether you accept him in your life or not. So he doesn't get to buy me, Amara said quietly. Correct, Henderson replied without hesitation. Your choices about your personal relationship with him are separate from your legal and financial protections. Amara pulled the key from her pocket and placed it on the table. He gave me this, she said. He said it opens a box in a bank. He also said there's a letter from my mom. The key is likely to his personal safe deposit box at Barclays Bank, Henderson said. It contains items he's collected for you over the years. As for your mother's letter, he nodded to Lydia. She left the room and returned a moment later with a thick, cream-colored envelope. Your mother, Eliza Williams, deposited this with us in the year 2000, Henderson explained. She requested that it be given to you if and when the truth about your parentage was revealed. Amara's name was written on the front in handwriting she recognized instantly. The same looping script that had labeled her school notebooks, signed her birthday cards, scribbled grocery lists on their fridge. Her chest tightened. Could I read it alone? She asked, voice shaking. Of course, Henderson said, standing immediately. Take all the time you need. Miss Powell and I will be right outside. When the door clicked, shut behind them, the room felt enormous and silent. Amara held the envelope in both hands like it was made of glass. Her mother's words were inside. Answers were inside. With trembling fingers, she tore the seal carefully and unfolded the first page. My dearest Amara, if you're reading this, it means the truth has finally caught up with all of us. The letters blurred as her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away and kept reading. The words on the page pulled Amara backwards in time to a version of her mother she had never really known. Eliza wrote about college and late-night study sessions with James, about fighting their way into tech jobs where people doubted them the moment they walked into the room. She wrote about meeting Richard Harrington at work, about being noticed, finally, for her talent, about feeling chosen. I won't lie and say I didn't know he was married. Her letter said, I knew. I also thought I was special enough that love would rewrite the rules. That's how foolish 23-year-olds can be. She described their hidden relationship, the hotels, the promises, the rush of believing his whispered assurances. Then the crash. On July 17, 1992, he came to me shaking. She wrote. His wife had found out. His board had threatened him. They called me names I won't repeat here. They made it very clear, if he chose me, he would lose everything he'd built. That date. The same one Harrington had told her to ask about. The same one that had made her grandmother go quiet. He chose them. Eliza wrote simply. His company. His image. His real family. He offered money. He offered to keep things quiet. But he wouldn't give his name. He wouldn't give you his open love. Pregnant, unemployed, publicly shamed, she had fallen apart. It was James who picked her up. James who showed up with food. James who took her to doctor's appointments. James who listened when she raged, when she sobbed, when she said she wished the baby had never been conceived. He told me I didn't really mean that. Eliza wrote. And he was right. When Amara reached the paragraph where her mother described James's offer, to marry her, to claim the baby as his, to raise Amara as his own. Her vision blurred again. He said our child didn't deserve to be a scandal or a secret. The letter said. He said, if she's born into my name, nobody gets to gossip about who her father is. They'll just know. They went through with it. On paper, Amara became James's daughter. In practice, she was loved like she was his. We didn't tell you the biological truth, Eliza admitted, because we wanted you to have a simple story in a world that already makes everything too hard for girls who look like you. But the letter didn't stop there. Eliza wrote about how things slowly broke inside her after James died in a car accident. How grief, guilt, and old trauma tangled together until she barely recognized her own thoughts. She saw danger where there was none. She heard accusations that no one had spoken. Some doctors said depression. Some said psychosis. Some said both. I tried to hold on for you, she wrote. But some days, I was more ghost than mother. Your grandmother took care of us both until I realized something terrifying. I was becoming a threat to your sense of safety. She described the day she left, not as abandoning her daughter, but as stepping away before her illness twisted her into someone who might hurt the child she loved most. It is the greatest regret of my life and the only decision I'm still sure was made out of love. She wrote, you deserved stability. I could not give it. There were paragraphs about Harrington too. How he had tried, years later, to send money openly, to claim his role in some quiet way. How Eliza had refused at first, then allowed him to provide through legal channels when she realized the system would never be fair to Amara. I did not want you to need him, she wrote, but I wanted you to have what I never did, options. At the end, her mother's words softened. If you are angry when you read this, you have every right to be. The letter said, angry at me, at Richard, at James, at the whole broken structure that made our choices feel so narrow. But please, my girl, don't let that anger define you. You are more than our mistakes. You are the best thing any of us ever created. Love is complicated. Blood is complicated. But this part is simple. You were always wanted. You were always loved, even when we did a terrible job of showing it. The last lines made Amara's throat close. When you decide what to do with this truth, her mother wrote, make the choice I never did. Choose yourself first. The pages shook in her hands when she finished. She sat very still, listening to the muted sounds of London outside the window, the hum of traffic, a distant siren, a bird somewhere above. Someone knocked gently. Miss Williams. Henderson's voice. Come in, she managed. He and Lydia entered, both wearing expressions that were professional but undeniably human. Are you all right? Lydia asked softly. No, Amara said honestly. But I think I understand more than I did yesterday. She told them, in pieces, what the letter had said, about July 17th, about James, about her mother's illness. She left out the most painful details, keeping them pressed close to her heart, where they were still too raw to share. What happens now? She asked finally. Legally. Henderson folded his hands. Your grandmother remains your guardian for as long as she is able. The trust ensures that even if her health declines, you have financial stability. If something were to happen to her, Mr. Harrington is prepared to petition for guardianship, but only if you agree. You won't be forced into his home or his life. And emotionally, Amara gave a tired half-smile. I guess that part's up to me. That part, Lydia said gently, is entirely yours. Amara picked up the small key again, running her thumb over the cool metal. This opens his box at the bank, she said. His collection of whatever he's been keeping. Yes, Henderson replied. We can accompany you there today, if you'd like. Or you can wait. There is no rush. She thought of the photo, the trust, the invisible ways he'd tried to help from the shadows. She thought of how cold he'd seemed on the plane, then how desperate he'd been when he grabbed her hand. I want to see what's in that box, she said at last. If he's been watching from afar, I want to know how. The bank was quiet, cool, and hushed, the kind of place where no one raised their voice and everything seemed to smell faintly of paper and polished wood. A clerk checked their IDs and led Amara, Henderson, and Lydia down to a small, secure room. There was a table, 2 chairs, and a heavy door that closed with a solid click. The clerk placed a long, narrow metal box on the table and stepped out, leaving them alone. This is Mr. Harrington's box, Henderson said. If at any point you'd like privacy. I want you to stay, Amara said. Just don't talk unless I ask, okay? Henderson nodded. Her fingers shook as she slid the key into the lock. It turned with a soft, final click. Inside, the box was filled with neatly arranged items. On top, there were photographs. Dozens of them. Amara picked up the first one. Her first day of kindergarten, standing outside a brick school with her backpack hanging low, her hair in messy puffs. She remembered Grandma insisting on taking the picture with a disposable camera. Somehow, a copy had ended up here, in a box thousands of miles away. Another photo showed her at a spelling bee, holding a certificate and trying not to grin too widely. Another, her in a worn Halloween costume. Another, her on a playground, mid-jump, face fierce with concentration. "How did he get these?" she whispered. "Most likely," Henderson said softly. He asked for copies quietly. "Donated to the school, to community programs, to hospitals in your area. When people are grateful, they're often willing to send an extra photograph to a donor who likes to see the impact." Beneath the photos were school report cards, printouts of emails praising her performance, newspaper clippings about small local awards she'd won. He had kept everything. At the bottom of the box lay an envelope with her name written in an unfamiliar, precise handwriting. Amara hesitated. "This from him?" she asked. "Yes," Henderson said. "He wrote it last year, when he updated his will and restructured your trust. He wasn't sure when, or if, you'd ever read it." She opened it. "Amara, if you're reading this, then I have finally done what I should have done a long time ago. Place the truth in your hands instead of trying to control it from afar." He wrote about his fear of scandal, of losing his company, of being dragged through the mud for his own choices. He admitted that he'd been a coward when it mattered most. "I convinced myself that stepping back was noble, that letting James raise you was for the best." He wrote. "Some of that was true. Much of it was simply me protecting myself." He described how he had followed her life from a distance, getting updates through lawyers and donations, watching her become exactly the kind of person he wished he had been at her age, brave enough to ask questions, smart enough to push back against limits. "I never claimed you publicly," he admitted, "but you have always been my daughter in the quiet spaces of my mind. When I see your photo, I do not see a scandal. I see the consequence of my failure and the proof that something good came out of my worst decisions." He apologized, not with flowery excuses, but with blunt words. "You don't owe me forgiveness," he wrote. "You don't owe me a relationship. The trust is not payment for your love. It is restitution for my absence. If you choose to walk away from me after learning everything, I will grieve, but I will accept it. If you choose to let me know you as more than a distant shadow, I will spend whatever time I have left trying to be worthy of that gift." The last line of his letter made her eyes burn. "Whatever you decide, please don't let my mistakes teach you to hate yourself. Let them teach you to demand better from the world and from the people who claim to love you." When she finished, her hands were trembling. Lydia quietly handed her a tissue. "I don't know what to feel," Amara said, voice cracking. "He hurt my mom." He walked away. But he also tried. In his messed up, secret way, he tried. "People can be both wrong and trying," Lydia said gently. "It doesn't erase the harm. It just makes the story more complicated." Amara looked down at her life spread out on the table. Photos, reports, scraps of memories she hadn't known someone else cherished too. "He whispered something on the plane," she said slowly. "Right before he crashed. James raised you, but you're my daughter. I've loved you from afar your whole life." The words had made her cry then, ripped from the rawest part of her. Now, they sat beside letters and evidence that said those whispers hadn't been just empty drama. They had been ugly truth and painful love tangled together. Henderson cleared his throat softly. "You don't have to decide anything today," he said. "You can return home, speak to your grandmother, let all of this settle. Mr. Harrington is still in the hospital. He has asked for no visitors until his condition stabilizes. When and if you choose to see him, we can arrange it." Amara stared at the box. She thought of her grandmother back home, exhausted but fierce. Of James, whose memory still wrapped around her like a warm blanket. Of her mother, somewhere out there, or gone, she didn't know, writing a letter years ago hoping her daughter would someday read it and understand. She also thought of the countless girls like her who never found out the truth, who never found out they were wanted, even clumsily. "I want to go home first," she said at last. "I want to hug my grandmother, visit James's grave, and read my mother's letter again." then maybe I'll see him. But if I do, it'll be on my terms. That, Henderson said, sounds like a very wise plan. On the flight back to Baltimore days later, sitting by the window with the secret garden in her lap and the key now hanging on a chain beneath her shirt, Amara watched the clouds slide by and thought about what kind of story her life was turning into. Not a simple one, not a fairy tale, but maybe something better. A story where the poor girl wasn't just a victim and the rich man wasn't just a villain. A story where people were messy and flawed and sometimes terrible, but also capable of change, apology, and quiet acts of care. She thought about how easy it would be to label him forever as the man who chose his company over her. But she also thought of the trembling hand on the stretcher, the whispered confession, the box full of carefully guarded memories. People had judged her all her life for being poor, for her skin, for her neighborhood, for having a grandmother instead of two parents at school events. Now she knew the truth. Judging from the outside had almost made her miss the most complicated story of all, her own. As the plane rumbled steadily through calm skies, she made a silent promise. She would not let money define her. She would not let shame define her. She would not let other people's secrets decide who she was allowed to be. And whenever she told this story, if she ever chose to share it, she would make sure people remembered one thing: respect everyone. You never know what storm they had to survive, or what whisper shattered their world and forced them to rebuild from the pieces.